well-known art lawyer. And your expertise started out with fine art, classical art. You've been in that field for many, many years. Now you've started to reach out into the NFT section as well, of course. Do you collect NFTs yourself? And which ones do you like, and why is that so?
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Anna. I would say I was always somehow interested as well in the technological aspects within the art market. So my first contact was in 2019 when I, in my function as a director for the Swiss Art Market Association, which is the overall umbrella association for the 4 dealers associations in Switzerland, we organized a conference for our peers. And I invited Johannes Gees, a conceptual artist who minted online on stage at the time an NFT, Clay 02 or something, as with a laser projection. He wanted to mint there at the time 360 unique pieces. And I was already a little embarrassed because at the time nobody literally was interested in, even amongst dealers and collectors. So I purchased one of these early for, I think, 200 Swiss francs. They were traded later on up to 8 Ethereum at the time. And I was, of course, interested from an artistic perspective as well in the Chaos project by Urs Fischer.
Lovely. So you are already personally involved in the NFT sector. That's great.
Yes, indeed. But my approach always was from an art perspective to buy something which had a quality criterion behind.
Could you describe that quality criteria? What defines it in your personal perspective?
Well, you somehow come up often now with this distinction in between collectibles and digital artworks, whether I would say also this distinction is not new when we're talking about collectibles in the so-called old world. We had categories like design, we had categories like Murano glass, ceramics, even watches, vintage cars, wine. You could go on and go on. And there, of course, the criterion is more of a scarcity or rarity of the object. And I would allow myself to put in, for example, the bored apes or these kittens in these kind of categories. Whether when we are talking about digital art, I would define it with the criterion of quality. But this is, I would say, the same as you would categorize a painting or a photography or an edition. This is an art criterion, the quality of the work.
Okay. In the quality, does the craft itself take a big position in it? Is a good coder a better digital artist? Or is someone who, for example, prompts an AI machine a good digital artist? Or is it what you perceive when viewing? How do you distinguish these two sectors?
I would say definitely the latter. I think it's an interesting question, but there I allow myself as well to compare it to somehow conservative arts as we used to know it before the NFT world. Because, of course, Jeff Koons himself never produced his steel rabbit, which was sold for 90 million, but he has at the best times of his career, probably 100 or 200 artists working in his studio. Ferdinand Hodler, a Swiss artist from the 19th century, at the best of his time, he was so much under pressure to produce artworks. There are paintings of his like Die Heilige Stunde, Sitting Woman. He did a series of 4 different paintings, and it's interesting that somehow they are now considered partly as being painted by his own hand and partly so-called only painted by the studio. So that's what I would say, that it's a matter of authorship, another a matter of craftsmanship.
Okay, understood. That's very interesting. The more you speak to technical people, the more they tend to say, I love the codes behind it. It's very interesting.
Of course. But, in a traditional art market, we often have these kind of questions, when it comes to as I said, studio artworks, or when there is a so-called co-authorship of several artists, or we have this famous example of frail artists, for instance, like Immendorf. Late Immendorf was an example. He was not able anymore personally to draw or to paint, but he gave the instructions to his assistants. So the question there is it still an authentic artwork, or isn't it an authentic artwork?
Absolutely. Most of your clients are collectors. They are probably HNI, high net worth individuals. So they are able and willing to buy large collections and to focus on these collections. Did you see some sort of swap into the NFT field within these collectors?
I mean, I would somehow make the distinction in between the world in the art market as it was before COVID and after. And I was, to give you an example here, I was invited still in the old era. In 2019, there was a conference being organized by Adam Lindemann, a very well-known collector in the States, during our Basel Miami Beach. And he came up with the idea to bring together traditional collectors and specialists, dealers, from the art market together with tech guys. And it was interesting at the time, then when you had the tech guys on stage, they literally were there saying, listen, we can somehow build anything, but you from the art world, from the art market, you need to come up with the right questions. And these worlds were so much apart at the time, it was really amazing to see. And then, of course, the COVID breakout came, and all of a sudden, the collectors were sitting at home very bored in a way, you know. And before, it was always this kind of understanding that somebody would have to somehow digest or to enjoy the aura, what we always were calling the aura of the original artwork, to be able to take a decision to pay an artwork in a price range of several $1 million. Whether later on with COVID, as I said, everybody's sitting around home very bored. All of a sudden, it was clear that at the time, the online trade has gained the momentum, and it became normal that also traditional collectors purchased an artwork simply through a JPEG online. Probably this is the first remark. Then the second remark is that it was, of course, a shift. And again, the driver was the auction market at the very first time, that all of a sudden they realized that there are plenty of new customers. As Christie's, I think, in their first online sales during COVID, came up with the incredible number that from 100 countries worldwide, they had bidders online. And of course, there came an entire crowd of new customers, and they, of course, were interested in luxury goods, in collectibles, and therefore it was easier to offer them digital art and NFT as well. And probably the third observation from my side is this, I would say, also very impressive in a way. Somehow also I see it as a critical moment, this shift of art collecting as a true connoisseurship, as it was before, to art collecting as a pure investment, as it is often understood today. And here, of course, bank institutes, financial advisors were often triggered or are triggering with new ventures. Artworks were somehow traded as shares now. There is this so-called fractionized artwork that you can own a fraction of a Picasso or whatsoever. And this as well bring in an entire new crowd, which was much more open than to digital art and NFTs.
Would you summarize that many of your collectors just participated in this new version of preserving digital art through NFTs due to some sort of FOMO, fear of missing out?
Interesting question as well. I personally consider my clients or the collectors as very focused on what really is interesting for them. So I don't see it that much as a question of fear of missing out something. Of course, at the first instance, everybody somehow try to test out something. But I think indeed it was an entirely new category, which we will see in a couple of years how this will develop. And my presumption here is that the world will not be reinvented here. It was probably the same, or it will be the same phenomena as it was, you know, when, for instance, 20 years ago, photography all of a sudden entered the stage. And then the curators or the people, the dealers being specialized in photography as an new art category, they pretended that painting will be dead because photography will take over. As we know today, that isn't the case at all. So it's simply a new addition as a new category. The same happened probably 10, 15 years later with video art. And my presumption is that it will be the same with the NFT and digital art as well.
You mentioned Urs Fischer and his project before. It's one of the greatest examples for community building in NFTs. I mean, something that I personally appreciate a lot in this art sector is the fact that you as a collector, a viewer, an interested person can participate in the creativity of the artist himself. The artist gives you options, like Urs Fischer makes you decide on an NFT, you buy that one, and then you decide with whom you pair to create a new work of art. And then also the questions comes up, do you have to decide whether you keep an old one? Do you create, there's so many decisions that you as a collector can take all of a sudden.
I think Urs Fischer is a very good example, because Urs Fischer, we are in agreement here, I suppose. It's not the collectible, it's an artwork. It's a digital artwork, and it was somehow produced initially or released or minted, as you say in your language, as an NFT. However, here as well, the world will not be reinvented. We had these questions before as well, and you mentioned that probably it's a little bit of a daring example with Da Vinci, but of course many artists used to work for a collector as a so-called commissioned artwork. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, but when you were powerful enough, you could order the painting in the color scheme you liked, probably, or something like this. So also these kind of questions are, I would say, quite kind of common already in the conservative art world. With NFT now, what indeed is interesting is what you pointed out correctly, the participation of the collector within the process of creation of a new artwork. I would say here one could talk about co-authorship, one could talk about common artwork being produced. However, here as well, I refer on what I said a minute ago regarding Maurizio Cattelan or Jeff Koons. Cattelan, for instance, was sued by the person who produced his very famous and very expensive figurine with the kneeling Adolf Hitler. And this gentleman claimed that he was the creator of the so-called artwork, and the court decision was in favor of Cattelan by saying what is the important thing is the act of creation, the idea, the materialization of the idea, and not the execution according to the plan of the artist. So I would say with the criteria we know in copyright regulation, also when it comes to ownership, you could somehow more or less structure and try to advise in most of these new NFT scenario as well.
So practically what you're saying is we have enough regulations and we do know how to handle these legal questions. So what we really need to understand is how is the process going on? For example, you mentioned the
authorship.
Exactly, the act of creation with the example of Catalan. For example, with NFTs, that can be generated automatically so that no human at all needs to interfere. You just mingle these NFTs and the creation comes out of an AI prompted machine, more or less.
Yes, indeed. But somehow the instruction to mingle, this has to come from a personality. And I would say the creator would be the one directing the machine to generate this new image.
Practically, you're saying we need to understand the circumstances of the creational process to then define what this legally means. What the outcome.
Yeah, as it always was the case. And of course, in the hype, in the first probably 24 months now, with this NFT hype in 2020, 2021, at the time, nobody was interested in listening to any legal applications because this was simply too complicated and boring and whatever. But it's always the case, you know, that we are, as lawyers, we are somehow experienced to. We always call them, but this is a question of sociology or sociology of law, the so-called cultural lag. There's first of all a development in a creative process in a society, and then of course the lawyers run behind trying to bring it into legal categories. But as well here, I don't want to disappoint you. Of course, it is very interesting to talk about this phenomena, but most, I would say, 85–90% you can easily solve with the existing legal measurements.
I personally agree from a legal point of view, absolutely. And
I'm glad.
We will not have a dispute there, not a legal one. I think the very challenging thing for us lawyers will be to completely understand how technologically this procedure will be implemented. It's quite difficult and challenging to understand how it works.
But again, Anna, if you allow me to add here, that's always the case. You only can advise properly as a legal advisor if you understand the facts of your case.
You agree that some fields are easier.
Yes, let's keep it like this.
NFTs were mentioned to be dead a couple of times, and especially with the decrease of the market in 21, nobody really invested. And ever since, I mean, also the currencies, the underlying Ethereum and all the others decreased in value dramatically. What is your personal prediction for the future of the development of NFTs in the art world? Do you think there is a good standing they will generate more interest? And if you could look into 10 years from now, how would this art world look like when it comes to NFTs?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that this will stabilize again. And you know how you say with this old saying, the wheat will be separated from the chaff. Again, it was always like this with photography. First it was a boom, then it came down very much. And now there is a clear canon that Andreas Gursky, or we had this beautiful exhibition of Jeff Wall recently at the Bayer Foundation. These are very well recognized artworks in contemporary arts. So when you have a one-man show at the Bayer, you're part of the art historical canon of today's world. And my presumption is it will be exactly the same with NFT. So I'm not afraid at all here, but it needs some time. And of course, there will be new museums pop up dedicated to digital art. I mean, remember the career of Refi Ganadol now within the last 2 or 3 years, which was simply amazing. And I'm pretty sure that a person like him will not disappear in the art market or in the museum landscape. There is this work at the MoMA now, which was gifted. There will be more works to come in museums shortly. And this is then somehow of a balance, and I'm pretty confident that this will work out with the NFT sector as well.
There's a thesis saying you need to divide the NFTs into what is collectibles or all sorts of fashion, what did we have, sneakers, all sorts of things that have nothing to do with digital art in itself. Do you think that we need to rebrand NFTs? We need to find a new wording saying this is just a declaration of ownership of a digital art? Would that help?
I think, again, collectible for me, criteria is more scarcity or rarity, whether for an artwork we have the quality criterion. But I allow myself to cite here the famous Swiss art dealer, as well as collector, Bruno Bischofberger, he is an incredible collector. He started early collecting prehistorical instruments. He collected böhmische Hinterglasmalerei. He's a specialist in Murano glass, in Finnish design, up to, of course, what he was famous for as a dealer. And he was the European dealer of Andy Warhol and then the dealer of Basquiat as well. And his only criteria is always quality. So when he purchases a Murano glass vase, of course, it's nice if it is a rare one, but it's the quality which counts. And I don't see any necessity to differ here when it comes to digital art or NFTs. In an art context, I'm not talking about memorabilias or about the Bored Apes, which then probably indeed are not in the category of an artwork, of a digital artwork, but somehow only as a collectible, as a Nike sneaker.
Probably only art history will show, looking backwards, what will be declared as art or not. But I agree to your assumption and your decision on how you look at this. The category.
This. Let's try to be patient. This probably needs an entire decade to be able to look back and say, and of course. Then the pioneering status was very important. It was always the case like this, that a new invention of an artistic practice, then the pioneers, they somehow were valued higher than the 25th artist who came up with the dot paintings after Damien Hirst. This is simply not interesting anymore.
Yeah. There's no novelty in it.
Exactly.
Yes. We have another question. What exactly do you mean when you state that technology will be a game changer for the entire industry? Would you want to give us some insights on that last question as well?
Yes, of course, because this is one of my favorite topics indeed, because when we are talking about technology in the art market, it's not, for me at least, it's not only about NFT or digital art from a content perspective, but it's more also for me a process how classical art transactions could be facilitated in the future. And let me explain it briefly in a way. When we look towards the seller side, there are now incredible new tools available for instance, for authentication purposes. I mean, this famous digital fingerprint. Imagine that an artist now is able to put that digital fingerprint on his canvas before the artwork leaves the studio. So authentication from this perspective, from this moment on, is not in question anymore. Then new possibilities to exclude forgeries. There are a couple of interesting, I would say, startup companies testing out the ground with AI applications to find out whether an artwork which is presented to them is a forgery or not. And then when it comes to condition reporting, for instance, which is always a huge topic in the market, it's very cost intensive normally when you have a beautiful work at your place and you want to send it in a museum to a museum in Japan. There is a conservator who needs to take a condition report here. It will be sent to the Japanese museum. Another conservator needs to double check it, whether there is an alteration in the condition of the surface of the work, and whether when you have somehow a technological tool now ready on your mobile device already, you can scan it in, send it out to Japan. The conservator scans it out, and within 10 seconds, you will get the result, whether there is a damage or not. And I could go on and on, and here provenance issue, that you have the entire trace of all relevant provenance information on the blockchain. And when we turn to the buyer side, of course, anti-money laundering prevention is a huge topic, which the art market, I would say, for a very long time, didn't pay enough attention. Now, all of a sudden, it became a huge topic as well. And there as well, there are digital tools for a dealer pragmatically to do his due diligence, know your customer requirements. So here I see the real chance for an improvement in transparency and security of art transactions.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think the limitation comes when when you need to get back to the physical artwork. As you mentioned, you can leave a fingerprint, some sort of, on the canvas, but this is still a physical canvas and you can manipulate it. The interesting thing is, for all data that does not need to be produced physically, like a provenance certificate, AML issues, these can be definitely more secured and practically like in a public official registry through an NFT. But the remaining question in that field, in my understanding, is when the combination comes from blockchain-based information and physical artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some insights on where we stand there? Is there and what is state of the art now? Does it exist?
No, the problem, probably this is a good closing remark here to end up with this question. I think we are still, which of course is a very interesting time to advise here. We don't have any so-called industry standards yet. Christie's was exploring the field very early when they sold a very reputable collection. And it was all, also the information was all secured on blockchain. And so all the big players, they tried to test this field, but there so far, at least what I know, we don't have any international industry standards here.
So you think that needs to be generalized and organized in an international setting?
I think so, and of course there are a couple of interesting startups around. Art Basel is participating in one project. I won't mention any names of specific companies here, but there are a couple of very interesting ones. But so far, nobody agreed on an international standard procedure so far.
So we will be very interested to see the outcome and the development in that field. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and for giving you your expertise on these questions. And we're looking forward to share more at a later stage. And thank you again for your time and all the interesting insights.
Absolutely. And thank you, Anna.